people that I worked with said Bryan was a really genuine person that cared about me as an individual, that like looked out for me and helped me in my career. Yeah, great. Hey, Bryan did some good stuff and helped us be successful. For sure, I want to do those too. But at the end of the day, what I find really rewarding is when I've made that personal connection and like difference in other people's lives. And yeah, I think that would be the primary thing.
Hey, Bryan, great to see you. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
Awesome. Hey, Bryan, you've had an amazing career today. You've worked with some really big brands, global giants. Take us through your career journey, maybe from the time of university or go further back if you want to.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's been maybe atypical. So I originally wanted to be a politician. I spent a year on Capitol Hill working for a congresswoman. They are all wonderful, but I realized I did not want to be a politician. It was not my thing. But I was always really fascinated with people. I loved like how people think, like why they think what they do and what they're thinking and how it attaches into how our brains work. So I majored in psych and philosophy, and then started my journey in people related consulting. So I did 12 years in consulting, the very beginning, really around employee engagement, understanding how people think about their companies and how it impacts company performance, job embeddedness, why people stay in their jobs versus why they leave, leadership development, so on and so forth. And I shifted into overall corporate strategy because I was doing projects and people many times after like a Bain or BCG or McKinsey would do a strategy project. And I thought, wow, that seems fun. I'd like to do that. And so I went to business school, went to Kellogg and outside of Chicago, and came out working for a company called Monitor Group. It's now been bought by Deloitte. Really doing growth strategies, how to get bigger, how to move into new sort of audience segments, verticals, geos. Got to live in some pretty cool countries as part of that. So Brazil for a little bit, back in South Africa originally, where I'm from, Mozambique, India, Dubai, and the UAE. And eventually decided that probably didn't want to spend my life moving from country to country for a year at a time, and shifted into internal strategy at Google as part of the central strategy team focused on go-to-market. And it wasn't actually until I joined a company called Rackspace that I moved into marketing. So I came in as chief of staff to the CEO and had an opportunity to roll out into the business as part of the deal of coming in. And marketing was that place to join. And I think some of the cliched opportunities of marketing wasn't necessarily showing the impact of the dollars it was spending. It wasn't as aligned as it could have been with sales. And so that was an area where I was coming in to help out. And I took over demand generation and a lot of the operations and analytics part of the org. I really liked it. I got to work with some great people. And then I shifted into a similar role at Tableau, built out e-commerce there into almost half the transactions, got acquired into Salesforce. And then had an opportunity to join ZoomInfo as CMO. And the overall sort of go-to-market tech space, and particularly the MarTech space, I've just been really fascinated about how sort of data and tech come together. And so ZoomInfo has been a really natural fit as leaders in B2B data and having an integrated go-to-market tech platform that sits on top of it. So yeah, it's been fun. Been here for about a year and a half now.
Yeah, cool. And then coming from such a diverse background or experience, Bryan, what was the biggest challenge coming into like digital space and marketing in particular?
Yeah, I've had a lot of situations where I've essentially been plopped into an area I didn't really know much of anything about. And so I think at first that was very challenging, whether it was related to the role or the country or sort of the industry. And I think what it forces you to do very quickly is realize you're not the expert. You need to rely on others. You need to get very good at asking questions, empowering your team, providing guidance where it makes sense, but also giving them the opportunity to excel. And so I would say that motion has been very true, like coming into sort of the marketing role as digital marketing. I think just a sort of a different iteration of that same problem. But yeah, I actually really thrive on that. Floundering at first, a little bit of petrified. Did I really just sign up for that? And yeah, it's been fun each time.
I love the pure marketer background that you've come from. You jump into it. I think that ethos of empowering others and bringing a really strong team around you is always the key to success. But if you think about a normal day as someone who wasn't a pure marketer to go, well, what does a day as a CMO of ZoomInfo look like?
Yeah, I must more that. So I'm maybe answering the term of what's my sort of week look like. But yeah, so like always start the week with trying to get sort of alignment with big groups, with my leadership team, with sales leaders looking at forecasts. What are the big deals? What are we trying to get done? Try and block my one-on-ones together and to just be efficient. I try and spend about 20% of my week, 25% of my week with customers. And so I think including I color code that so I can visually see, is it reflected in a sort of a significant part of my calendar? And then something I took with me from Salesforce that we started in marketing here, and now we do it the entire company, is this idea of like maker time. So we do 2 or 2.5 hour blocks twice a week where you can't do meetings. It's just about focused sit down work that I've actually found to be really effective. It's when I get a lot of my sort of thinking done, potentially catch up on some different pieces. And then I come from Tableau, so I really do love Tableau. We use it, but sort of data is normally not that far away from me. I do find it to be very critical to drive decisions. It doesn't tell you everything, but you really need to understand what is and isn't working to really ensure that one, the company is successful, but also sometimes as marketers, we can be perceived as being soft, which I don't think is a fair perception, but certainly you can help that perception if you are very data driven in the decisions that you're making and what you're surfacing to the org. And so that tends to be an important part of my week as well. It's just understanding what is and isn't working, how we perform.
Hey, Ricky, marketers aren't soft.
Don't start a war now. I've never ever said that off or on air. I do want to come back to data, of course, Bryan, but just want to take you back a little bit. What was your biggest takeaway from your time at Tableau, Rackspace in particular?
You said related to data or just in general?
Just in general.
Whew, biggest takeaway. So I would say that like personally, what I took away and really for each of the job changes I've made is obviously you've helped the company be more successful. You've iteratively made progress, learned some new things. The lasting impact for me is always like the relationships that I have. And the thing I get the most gratification, particularly after I leave, is when someone says, hey, you may not have realized this, but this helped chart the course of my career or sort of jumpstart me in a new direction. And so that's, I think, is always like the lasting memory I have from any of the jobs. But in terms of more like business related takeaways, Tableau just did a really good job of effectively organizing and injecting data into sort of our outreach to customers and being thoughtful and scaled in how we did touch points across different channels that I think was great to see. And then at Rackspace, it had this idea, maybe two things, this idea of fanatical support, which is maybe an odd way of framing things, but it gives you the picture of you're sort of like over the top in support. And then one of the founders or initial investors said that people want to be valued members of a winning team on an inspiring mission. And I think those three things are just so important. If you're always thinking about, are you creating that environment for your team members? That's where people are really going to thrive and want to come in every day and give you their best. And so I aspire to doing that. I don't know that I do it, but I aspire to.
Nice.
It's a much better way of saying what I always say, have fun, right? If people are having fun, they will outperform, they will work their butts off and they will grow and your business will grow. So I really love that.
Yeah, for sure.
And you mentioned about data, Bryan. Obviously, you're big on it. I think marketing's always led the way. Sales has followed. So what's been your framework and how do you leverage data, analytics, and technology when it comes to marketing strategies, especially what you're doing now at ZoomInfo?
Yeah, and then this one, when I saw your questions, it actually prompted me on something that I put together a few companies ago. So I actually started at Rackspace and then done since. If you wouldn't mind, I'd love to pull it up and
please.
So everyone can humor me with what is not a marketing tiered slide, but I'll show it anyways.
That's good. It shows you progression, right? So from your early marketing days to where you are now as a CMO.
Yeah.
I'm expecting the best slide I've ever seen.
Yeah. So I call it the integrated go-to-market machine, but it's the idea that everything you should be doing should be starting with your company and go-to-market strategy. Around that, you need to know who are your buyers, what are the insights about the companies, the individuals, how they think about the world, what are their priorities, what are their pain points, what are the use cases, the journeys they're going to go through, all that good stuff. And then how you want to position and message your offering in a way that relates to them, because ultimately the customer should be at the center. And then the components, as you asked about from a data point of view, and this is how I think about marketing as a machine. First, you need a data foundation. It doesn't have to be in singular place, but it has to be integrated and it has to give you a holistic portrait both about your known and unknown individuals and who they are, their behaviors and everything like that. There's a really key decisioning component. So that's first just surfacing what is going on, what companies and customers work the best, what marketing activities work the best, scoring those and creating models that hopefully are then real-time triggers. And ideally what you want to have is really a bank of assets. You need to have content that you're constantly testing and optimizing against, again, in an automated way, even better, and particularly effective if it's done in an integrated way across channels. So you're creating this holistic outreach, one, because not everyone is going to be able to engage or engages on individual channels, but also they reinforce each other. And hopefully they then all tie together and that it's not just a one direction, but you take all of that and it feeds together. I started that at Rackspace. I iterated on Tableau. I actually pulled this together as part of my interview process for ZoomInfo, talking with the CEO about how I think about the world. Probably would benefit from a little bit of branding. But yeah, that's how I think about data and tech.
Yeah. I love that.
I love it.
Just going back to the first layer that you mentioned, the first big blue point about data foundation. In our experience, the biggest challenge there was ensuring data hygiene and all the data was actually lined up in a place where we could all read from or read and write. How do you actually ensure that everyone's comprehending the data in the same way? Because marketers would assume one thing and then the sales team would do the other. How do you ensure that at ZoomInfo, Bryan, that there's a consistency in reading the data?
Yeah. So maybe a few things. I think some foundational issues even before you get to the comprehension. Many companies that we talk to do not have their data in any sort of singular location. So you have sales and marketing just looking at different data. Many times that data is not clean. So I think anyone who's probably listening, if you think of your sort of CRM, Salesforce, HubSpot, that it is not perfect because the people who are entering it in, their primary goal is not to have the data be perfect. It's to get the baseline in there. And then if they need to update it later, fine, they do it. But so it's decentralized and incorrect data, and it gets stale quickly because people leave roles and whatnot. So assuming you can get all of the data in a sort of an organized spot, first and third party data, different sources, then I think you have the question of comprehension and how is it being surfaced up. Many companies though don't actually even get to that stage. So when we talk to our customers about this a lot, it's how do you get the centralized point of data, surface it up in a way that's intelligible, depending on what you're looking at. I think it's a combination of whether it is a Tableau or Power BI or whatnot. You need people who are data storytellers to be able to make it intelligible and easy to understand because we all get overloaded with data. And it's actually a big thing I've been talking with my team internally about, and then externally, it's how do you help unlock those insights? So sift through all that noise and just surface up the things that are most relevant. And I think from a go-to-market point of view, that's normally tell me who I need to focus on and what I need to do in relationship to that company or that individual. And so that's actually what ZoomInfo is trying to do is go from volumes of data to unlocking insights. And we're calling it signal to like revenue. And so how do you take the signals and then how do you actually direct towards the revenue taking action? And ideally leveraging Gen AI, facilitating creating some of that content that you can then distribute across channels. Did that answer your question, Ricky?
It really did. And I've got probably more questions on back of that. And you mentioned something about data storytelling. That's an art in itself. How are you in your position, Bryan, consuming that? What are you doing with it? What stories are you being told? Because so much has changed, especially in the last 12, 18 months. So how are you making the decisions month over month, quarter over quarter, year over year? What data are you particularly looking at?
Yeah. When it's potentially just a function of like where the companies I've come from, I'd like to think of part of my role as being a storyteller with data and to sort of shape our strategy. In fact, with our CRO, we were just putting together our multi-year strategy. And a core part of that was the data that helped us tell it. And so one of the things that I've tried to do with my team is we may discover an insight as we're sifting through data, but it's just an interesting insight unless you've used it to actually convince leadership to do something differently. And so a lot of what we spend our time on is how to see that insight, potentially dive a little deeper, see what iterations of it make the most sense, and then surface it up into a really cogent story. And I don't know that we perfected the motion, but I think it's nice to have everyone meet once a week and you stare at a dashboard and you're like, oh, that's interesting. But it's not very useful unless you're taking action. And I think it's those focused, okay, we've now noticed something, how do we surface it up on a somewhat regular basis? And then as you're thinking about planning, are you looking at all those relative data points and then figuring out what are the key things that we want to then lift up in support of our strategy? And so I think it's ongoing, but also then tied to specific planning events that we do it. And yeah, I think marketing in many ways is in a good position to do it because we should be storytellers.
When you think about like you and your CRO getting together and working with stuff, how did you guys come to an agreement on which data source is the source of truth and what the important things are to look at? Because like you said, lots of stuff goes in everywhere. There's data all over the place, and marketing can be looking at these things and treating a lead in this particular way, and sales could be getting that same lead and going, that's crap. I don't like it. How have you, do you work together to work out, hey, this is the way we're going to look at this thing. This is the customer journey that we agree on, and this is what's going to happen. Did it organically happen?
Yeah, and I feel like I'm cheating a little bit just because of the practical, like how ZoomInfo works. Like our whole platform is to try and create like centralized data that then is used across. When I can't take credit for. When I joined, like our sales and marketing teams had by far the best relationship I've ever come across in any company. So maybe what I'll do is speak about like how we try and help other companies do it, just because it does work really well. Ideally, what you need is data in the same spot. You need either just a very strong trusting relationship or sort of a neutral arbiter who can surface up that data. Because then it's very easy for me as a marketer to say, man, I create amazing like leads or pipeline, but you sellers, you just don't know how to close. And the sellers do sort of the inverse. And then when you're then leveraging that, you need to really be on the same page around what are the problems that you are trying to solve? What are the priorities that you're both going to work on? How do you then measure those? Like, what are the goals and the actual metrics that you're going to then use? And then how does that cascade down to the set of activities? And then how are you looking at those and then holding each other accountable with that baseline of trust? So I think that's where we see a lot of companies falling short. I do think I benefit from having a CEO who always really appreciated that tight alignment. And even if he didn't appreciate it, he is certainly sure to make sure that we are going to appreciate it, because it's the only way that we're going to be successful and have the 40% margins is if we're on the same page and working together.
I think that's probably more where I get, you guys have a very tight ability with the data part, but data's just still data, right? And if you two don't come to alignment and work closely together, all the data in the world won't help you actually continue the company, right? And that's something that I know I spent a lot of time, and Ricky and Carla back in the day spent a lot of time building that really strong relationship, because it allows you to look at the data and actually get an outcome rather than it just be a dashboard you stare at. Is there things that you do together that helps foster that? I know you said it was good when you got there, which helps, but what were the things that you did when you joined that helped to really build that strong connection between marketing and sales?
Yeah, so definitely the word that came to mind is impersonal. I don't mean that it's you're personally looking at the problem and collectively trying to figure out how to solve it, rather than it's James is our CRO, rather than it's like a James issue or a Bryan issue. And I think that is really important. So it's the trust, sort of the collective's problem solving spirits, the openness to what does the data tell us. And then we're always just needing to iterate. I actually thought something that was really interesting. Adam Selipsky is the CEO at AWS. He was the CEO at Tableau. He said something at reInvent, which is, it's related, but the idea that actually having scale issues in what you put together is a really good thing, because it means you're growing. So the same sort of thing for me is like, when you find something that's not working, it's a really good thing, because it means you've unlocked a huge opportunity to do something differently and better. And so I think we try and approach those things as, how do we create that unlock, and how do we iterate, and how do we get better? And that sort of willingness to collectively problem solve, but also share success. I really appreciate the partnership on the sales side for their, hey, marketing, that was amazing. Thank you so much. And we try and do the same thing. I think it's that collection of like how we work together with the data is an underlying sort of resource that allows us to be effective.
That's a see. Problem is an opportunity, right, for you to continue push growth. I like it. It's a good mindset.
Bryan, I wanted to understand what your first 100 days look like. ZoomInfo has been a widely successful brand. You come into an organization that's already scaling and is growing at a big rate. You coming in to make even a bigger impact. What did your first 90, 100 days look like?
Yeah, and I'm sure many folks have read like the first 90 days. And so that's like my general approach. When I was going through the interview process, everyone said, ZoomInfo moves fast. And I thought, yeah, sure, it moves fast. Every company I've worked at says we move quickly. ZoomInfo moves quickly. What was first 90 days was really like first 45 days for ZoomInfo. It, like very much for me, and I actually came in, I developed this in the past. These are all of the things I need to know when I'm joining a company. And I actually sent it to my boss in advance saying, across a whole bunch of different types of information, this is what I would like to be successful. Can you help me? Who can I talk to? And he said, talk to these people for these different things. And then I just created a list of all the people that I wanted to get to know. And I actually started that scheduling. So when I came in, those were already there. I talked to a lot of customers. I talked to analysts. And so there was just very condensed, nothing but me speed dating with as many people as I could. And then really by the first 30-day mark, I had a really strong point of view of strengths and areas for development. And the first thing I actually then did is I took that back to my team in small groups with all of marketing and said, hey, this is what I heard from all of my conversations with you and others. What do you think? And in general, I'd done a decent job of capturing people's perspective. But through like the broad survey I had done in marketing as part of that collection, I had heard that marketers didn't always feel like what they were saying was being listened to. And so I wanted to make sure, hey, I am actually really listening to you. I synthesized it. I'm listening again to make sure it's on the right page. And then I surfaced that up, because at the end of the day, your team knows much more than you do. They're much closer to what's going on. And then by 45 days, I had a very clear plan that I'd lined all the way through, like the ranks up into our CEO. And by 60 days, I had a number of very clear, quick wins. I'd implemented a new structure within marketing, and we were already off to the races on a number of areas. And so that, and another thing to call out, I always believe as a marketer, sales and finance are your two biggest potential supporters or detractors. And so I was very cognizant of what I was going to do to get them on board. So with sales, the benefit of having some decent relationships with customers. And so I leveraged those to help us close some deals. And so they said, immediately you're adding some value. And with finance, I've generally found in most companies, you are spending some significant chunk of money on media, and you're normally spending some significant chunk of that inefficiently. And if you can go in right away and identify that, your CFO is very happy. And so I said, hey, here's money we're not spending well. Some of this I'm going to give back to you, a small amount. A big part of it I'm going to reinvest. And I actually then also used it to help fund some additional headcount. And right away, we then saw improved results because we were thinking differently about how the funnel worked and how we were driving ACV or revenue. So that was like the first 90 days and how I tried to approach it.
That's awesome. That's great. Lots of great tips in their framework that a lot of people can follow. You mentioned quite a bit about customers, Bryan. You said 20% of your time each week is locked away with customers. A lot of people listening to this would be going, yeah, that's great. But most amount of criticism that marketers face is that they're not customer facing. They don't spend enough time on the events booth. They don't spend enough time with customers curating stories. Why do it? Why are you doing it? And why do you encourage others to do it? We know the obvious piece, but why are you actually being intentional about it?
I don't know any other way to do it, but practically, I really enjoy the research that comes out of the Ehrenberg Bass Institute and how they think about the world. And what they say is to be effective at marketing, you need to start with buying situations. You need to understand what their thoughts, feelings, and emotions are in those buying situations and then attach your brand to it. And the only way to understand sort of your buyers in those buying situations, their thoughts, feelings, and emotions is to talk to them. And so there's a lot of ways to collect that information. One is through sort of those conversations. I think a scaled way is talking to analysts and getting their point of view. We have our own product called Chorus Conversational Intelligence. So you at scale can actually listen to a lot of those conversations. In the past, before I had that, I would really shadow CRs and listen to how they were framing problems and how we were responding to them. And then there's obviously other scaled ways through like customer surveys and whatnot. But if you're wanting to drive revenue, which hopefully marketers are, the best way to do that is to figure out what the people you're selling to want so that you can sell it to them better. And there's obviously the feedback you provide to your product team so that they make the best products possible. But there is a lot you can actually win without that, because there's research that shows Bain and Google did this last year and found that when in the B2B space, when people are looking at tech and services, 90% of the time they have a day one list. 80 to 90% is the range to pay on an industry. And 90% of the time they choose from that day one list, which means that essentially, if you get on that day one list, you have a really good chance of carrying through. And the practical reality is it's not always the product that gets you on that day one list. It's you are top of mind in a buying situation, and that is all marketing. And so that you have a huge opportunity to influence revenue by just understanding those components. So that's the rationale behind why I do it and a little bit of how I approach it.
Yeah, very well stated. The other question I was going to ask when you talked about your first 90-day plan was, what was your thought behind leadership team composition? What were you reviewing, and how do you go about structuring a leadership team?
Yeah, maybe a few things. So I think my overall approach towards leadership, 3 components. One is you're really there to set the direction for the organization. So hopefully you have a clear understanding of the business, everything, and you say, here are our goals. These are the guardrails in which I want everyone to operate. And then you quickly get out of the way. The second one is you're really focused on stakeholders. So it's really important to understand who your stakeholders are. I think that's actually a big misstep, is people don't actually think, who are the people who can either help or hinder my project or my efforts? Really understanding what they want, not just what they say, and then bringing them along. And then the third piece is really how do you empower and maximize the value that your team can create? And so I do assess for those components when I'm thinking about team members. And then the type of leadership that I like, I call it consultative, going back to a leadership class I took a few years ago, which is the idea of you want to get input from the people on your team, and then you want to be able to make decisions. So you're not authoritative and you just say, hey, everyone's going to do this. And you don't rely on the team to just decide everything, but you make better decisions because you pull people in. So people then feel encouraged to actually participate. You acknowledge when you've changed your point of view because of people's input. So again, it encourages people to participate, but then you're decisive and you're willing to iterate, because I think there's research out there that shows it's not necessarily the perfect decision, but it's making a decision and then sticking to it for long enough that you can actually see output that's really important, being willing to learn. And so I think those are components that I look for in my team. And then just something else that I didn't specifically mention, probably one of, as I'm interviewing for folks, some of the things that I focus on most is people's willingness to learn, their self-awareness. I am always amazed when I ask people a pretty basic question. What are your top 3 strengths and your top 3 areas for development? And they either give me like really boilerplate areas for development, or they can't even come up with them. And I'm like, okay, we can stop the interview now because like I have lots of things I can do differently and better. And so that sort of self-awareness, the willingness to take feedback, and then you look the sort of examples of I've learned and I've done something differently, I think is really key.
Now, coming back to ZoomInfo a little bit, a lot has changed. What's the biggest challenge you and your team is facing?
Only allowed one, like a few things. ZoomInfo has traditionally been known as being the world's best contact database. And I think over time, it's expanded to being known for having the best company contact data, the best intent data, the best technographic data within the sales world. So there's still a lack of awareness on the marketing side to that reality, but also the fact that we have this integrated platform that spans sales and marketing. We have an ABM platform that's there as well. So I'd say that's been the macro opportunity for us. How do we make sure that everyone is aware of those capabilities? And then I'd say an internal challenge. Like when I was going through the interview process, my boss said, hey, we haven't done brand before. We're not going to do brand. You can't see the clear dollar in, dollar out. And I said, I'd love the chance to change your mind. There's a lot of research that says it's worthwhile. But making that case internally to do brand, and we actually did our first brand campaign in July of this year the company had ever done, and had some great results. LinkedIn is an example. If people saw our brand ads before the demand gen ads, it was just under 2%, 2 times more likely that they would convert. YouTube, we're 2.3 times more likely for people to see ads all the way through to the end. So like some really good results that have turned into revenue. And I think it maybe helps with that case, but like building that case internally has been a challenge, and one that I continue to have to advocate for. Is I know it's important, but it's something you start to see more and more results on as they build.
So were you also the brain behind the Formula One branding piece that you guys did? Vegas was lit up with ZoomInfo signs, and Henry was actually quite proud of it.
Yeah, that was a really cool opportunity. Yeah, that was thanks to our partners at StackAdapt, where that became an opportunity. And they actually approached us. For those who don't know, StackAdapt helps in sort of the media space with media placement and out of home and across different channels as well. They have a DSP and whatnot. They had some extra inventory, and we're looking for a way to offload that inventory in a way that made sense to them. And we talked about some of the sort of the commercials and commercial deal, how that could work. I had a bit of a roadblock, and then I ended up talking to their CRO, and we netted out a way that made a lot of sense. It was essentially, we were able to get 4 massive billboards right around the F1 track, including ones that showed up on TV, which was so cool. And it was actually cost neutral to us based on the way that we figured out how to do some of our media placement next year. So it was essentially like massive publicity for not expense in any meaningful way for us. And I got to put a little bit of my sales hat on in that situation. And yeah, it was an example of us, as we always try and do, be very creative. How do we maximize output for minimal input? And always try and treat our customers as true partners that we are working with to maximize the benefit both ways. So yeah, it was fun doing that. It was fun showing up on those big screens. And then it was particularly fun being on TV.
Yeah, super proud moment.
So you make the CFO happy, the CRO happy, all in one deal. Like winning.
And just a funny thing, one of our customers actually said that they were debating about going with ZoomInfo, and they saw our billboard and said, wow, they're with so many big brands, like we should give them a try. I don't know that I'll ever get credit for a billboard contributing to revenue outside of that example, but I do have that one in a Slack that I've shared with CRO and CPO.
I'd be putting that up on everywhere. Billboards work. Look, I have proof. Look, what we've got you to, industry veteran, all the cases you've been, like, when you look forward, and I've been speaking to a whole bunch of people over the last couple of weeks, and I'm hearing a little bit more optimism about 2024 and 2025. But for yourself, as you're looking forward from an industry perspective as well as for ZoomInfo, how are you looking at the next couple of years?
So in terms of the macro economy, or just how are we thinking about?
Yeah.
So particularly with Gen AI becoming, I'll answer from this lens and then maybe more broadly. I think everyone at first was really, really excited about the potential of Gen AI. And then everyone's now starting to realize, I don't think everyone's quite gotten there, that Gen AI is somewhat useless unless it's actually based on good data. And I think so there are more and more people that are thinking about that. And I think we're starting to get into the realization of, wow, if I have to have good data in an integrated format that everyone has access to, that's a big lift potential lift in terms of like system and integration and whatnot. And so ZoomInfo is incredibly well positioned because practically we have the best B2B data in the world. And I think it's always been something that's been important, but it's going to be way more important as everyone's thinking about how to do Gen AI. And so whether people use our data and our Gen AI, or they use our data to underline their models or work with our many partners in sort of AWS and GCP and stuff like in Databricks, I think that's a pretty special spot to be in, is people are trying to look to be more effective and more efficient. And then in terms of more of a sort of an economic point of view, certainly within our sort of, talked about this in the earnings call, we're seeing sprouts of positivity, but there's obviously a lot of companies that are still weathering through the storm. And I think we are very excited about what is to come. We think we are very well positioned with our strength in data and sort of technology to help everyone drive the efficiency regardless of the economic impact. And even in some ways, a big driver for us with the downturn is people are realizing they have way too much technology. It's not integrated. They haven't implemented it. And so we've actually seen a lot of business growth just from that, where people are saying, wow, I can integrate or use an integrated platform and consolidate onto one go-to-market platform that spans sales and marketing. So I think, yeah, we've tried to be good partners, knowing that when we come out of the downturn, that'll hopefully like net out well for our customers, but also for us as well.
Yeah, positive outlook. Before we got on the call, Bryan, you mentioned we were talking about some wonderful people you've had the opportunity to work with. I also assume you've had some really good mentors throughout your career.
Yeah.
What's been like one or two really good advice that you've gotten in your career that's really stuck with you?
Yeah. One of them I mentioned, which was an initial investor at Rackspace, which was that idea of everyone wants to be part of being a winning team, inspiring mission, valued member. And that stuck with me. It was actually the CEO who's my boss at Rackspace. Anytime he was about to tell me that I'd done something really poorly, he would say some iteration of feedback is a gift, or if people are bothering to give you feedback, it means they're investing in you. It's much easier to not say anything. And I do think that's really true. So when I get really tough to hear feedback, I always try and frame it into they're investing in me. And even if I don't believe it's true in their perception. And so that there is something that I need to work on. And so I think those have really, really stuck with me. One of the earliest bosses I had, so it would have been 23 at the time, paraphrased a little bit, but that sort of many of us, much of the time, are in an uncomfortable spot, are beyond our skis. And it's about what you do in those situations that sort of defines you. And you should lean into those opportunities. And then a separate thing we always talked about was this idea that if you're really trying to advance your career, you should look for the areas where being beyond your skis in a particular area is less risky for you than someone else. And you're willing to take that risk to jumpstart your career. And so obviously, I moved around a lot in terms of the roles I had and the different jobs I took. But as an example, like when I was based out of Brazil, I had an opportunity to go to Mozambique. And I don't know that would be the first place most people would think about taking on an opportunity. But as someone who was in my 20s, I was sitting at tables with like ministers and with like heads of multinational corporations who are trying to invest in the country. Would have never done that if I hadn't said, hey, I'm going to go to a country I haven't been before in a language I'm still learning, which was Portuguese, and taking that risk. And I've done that helping start a new office in Dubai and in the UAE. There's just a lot of those where I'm like, this could be exciting. It's a little bit of a risk, but it's something I'm willing to do that maybe some others aren't. And I think it's just created a lot of opportunities for me as well.
Yeah, I think that's good tips for anyone listening out there. Right? Take some risk, back yourself, learn along the way. Bryan, this is one of my last questions. It's become one of my favorite ones of late. So I'll ask you the same. When you do decide to hang up your boots, what do you want to be known for?
I think a little bit of what I said relative to when you asked about Tableau and Rackspace, that people that I worked with said, Bryan was a really genuine person that cared about me as an individual, that like looked out for me and helped me in my career. Yeah, great. Hey, Bryan did some good stuff and helped us be successful. For sure, I want to do those too. But at the end of the day, what I find really rewarding is when I've made that personal connection and like difference in other people's lives. And yeah, I think that would be the primary thing.
So watching others grow. That's pretty cool. Yeah, nice one. Hey, we'll take you through a quick fire round. Every guest that pops on, we ask them the same questions. They should be pretty straightforward. So let's see how you go, Bryan.
Okay.
Favorite sports team?
In general, it's been anything that Neymar has been on, but I haven't followed him since he left PSG. I don't have those teams on my TV.
He's playing in Saudi now too, isn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's where I can't get access to those games, and he's injured right now, so he's made it very tough to follow.
Cool.
Nice. Great player. What about favorite music type? What's on your playlist? What's your go-to?
I love house music with a passion, and I love dancing to house music. And luckily, it's just my wife and daughters that see me dance.
There's a follow-up episode now. We're just going to see Bryan dancing. Yeah. Nice.
Next time we do, resist the urge to dance.
I don't know if it was actually intentional. It was a company presentation. Everyone got music as they were getting up on stage, and I didn't until I got up on stage. And I was like, "Is this a test?" No, I'm expected to dance.
Little shuffle. Nice. We obviously leading up to holiday season, Christmas just around the corner. Do you have a favorite movie that's playing in the background? What's your favorite movie?
Yeah, I don't know that I have certainly a favorite Christmas movie, but one is a kid I always watch with sort of White Christmas. But yeah, my two daughters are too young to probably appreciate that one. So.
Fair enough. You've been to some amazing places. You lived in some of the most amazing spots in the world, Bryan. What's your favorite place to visit?
Favorite place to visit? So I would say both to visit and live. I would love to move back to Sydney. It's such a special place. Yeah. Australians are wonderful people, but since my wife is from Brazil, I also do have a really strong sort of passion and attachment to Sao Paulo, and then where she's from in Brazil.
Somewhere by the ocean. So we'll take a shot. We'll scrub Brazil. Just for you, Sean. Bryan, this is the main one. This is the whole reason we actually decided to do this podcast. All your other insights mattered, but this is what really is going to make or break. Peanut butter. How do you like yours? Crunchy or smooth? He's thinking about it.
Wow.
There's suspense. Yeah. There's suspense. Yeah. There's pressure.
Yeah. He did psychology. He gets that this is the question of whether you're a good person or not. That's,
I know.
I'm serious.
You're probably not even going to share this if I answer incorrectly.
No, we just jump over your answer.
That's good. So I really like the ones where you have to mix it up beforehand because it's been separated apart. And I do think they're crunchy, but not too crunchy. So I don't like it when it's like huge chunks. Anyway, so it leans on the crunchy direction, but not like huge chunks of peanut.
We'll still take it as crunchy and you're a good person.
That's semi-crunch.
That's good. Okay, that's good.
Awesome.
That's marker. I was trying to.
You're on the right side.
I like how you tried to get both sides of the coin there. I like it.
Crunchy, but not too crunchy.
We've not had that before. So you kind of stayed on the fence. So it's really hard to go either way, right? But
we pushed him off the fence onto crunchy very clearly.
I'm trying not to be pinned down too easily.
We love that. Awesome, Bryan. Thank you for coming on the show again, and thank you for your insights. This has been amazing.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me both.
Awesome, mate. This has been great.